to this day, I do pro bono divorces. To this day, they are more complicated than so many other divorces because the people didn't have anybody to help them get their legal issues straightened out in the first place. You know, and they will have so many complicated legal issues, and they will enter into mortgages and contracts and second mortgages and not realizing they just put their house up to secure, you know, this person's car, and they just, and by the time you look at it, it's just overwhelming. And so when I was counseling, I'm like, I can't try to reframe this for you because your life really is that bad right now. You know, there's really no way to spin this because you do have tremendous problems and you need a lawyer to do this and this and this and this. Or the worst thing for me was whenever I had an abused person come in. That I just have never been somebody who can do just empowerment and build that person up. I'm the person who's going to go up to that person and expect a response and expect something to get done about it. I've always been that person. So for me, the best way for me to be effective as a social worker is as a trial lawyer. I tell people all the time, I'm just a social worker with a law degree. I just have a different credential than other social workers. But that's what I do. There's not a person who calls my office, who comes in to see us, who isn't hurt. Nobody's calling me because they want me to put together a big deal that's going to make them $1 million. Everybody hurts. And my counseling skills, I think, are invaluable in that regard because of what I do and how hard it is to have a successful malpractice claim. I have to tell 99.9% of the people who call me, no, I can't help you. And a lot of times they just want answers, and nobody will give them answers because they're tired, they're afraid to get sued if they get a straight answer. So a lot of what I do is spend the money to get medical records just to tell somebody, this is why your mom died. Nobody did anything wrong. This is just really bad luck, and this is why. That's something my partners encourage me to do, and that's something I do. I don't make any money on that. But that's something I think people need in my area. I want to help people get compensated if they need it, but I also want to help them heal and move on. And I want to also prepare them if they do decide to go the path of litigation, what they're getting into. Because that's grueling. And I have to counsel people every day. When they talk about attorneys and counselors, they mean the counseling part, or at least it's what I do. But anyway, I appreciate you inviting me here, and thank you for your attention. Our next speaker is Leah Dienger, and she received her MSW degree in 1991 and her MSW in 1994 with a concentration in law.
Hi, good evening. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you guys. I met with some social work students last week. They had a class they had to do an interview for, and just sitting with them at the table at Panera just enthused me as much as they were enthused to be in my company. I think there's great energy among social workers, and I love to be in the presence. And so if you are looking for someone to dissuade you from getting an MSW, I would not be the person to talk to. I love my social work degree, and even reflecting as I was thinking about what to say tonight, reflecting back, I just get so excited because I have the perfect degree, and I have never veered from that thought. An MSW is a very diverse degree, and it allows the flexibility to be able to do anything. As you know, as you're hearing from other stories, you really can take your MSW and do so many different things. So by the end of hearing me speak, there's a couple of things. If you're leaning towards the clinical track, you're probably going to think maybe I have a little bit of a mental health disorder. But if you truly know your social work degree, you'll realize that there's so many opportunities out there. Sometimes it's hard to hone in on just one. And so how many, if I were to ask you to raise your hand, how many of you have had the life that you always thought you would have? It's perfectly planned, it's laid out, it's, you know, things have just lined up and it's happened the way they should be. Is there anybody in here that's had that life? Well, the beautiful thing about a social work degree is that it moves with you. It's very fluid, and that's what I found. So sort of through my stories and my work experience, I just want to share with you, and hopefully you will glean, that no matter where you are in life, there's an opportunity for you. You just have to keep your eyes wide open and be open-minded as to where can I go. As many of you probably read, I'm with IBM now, which is a corporate company. I've been there for 4.5 months now. I can tell you 5 months ago, I said, I would never work for a corporation. Like, I am not corporate America. That is not me. I'm a social worker. I do what I want to do. I don't work for, so I'll be interested to share with you with IBM how it's really been sort of a perfect fit and how I'm making that work. But, so I graduated nearly 25 years ago. It's a long time ago. And very fortunately adopted when I was 14 years old by my guardian ad litem. And so I had various glimpses of life which were certainly very difficult. Looking back on that, that's where my strength comes from, and my empathy in situations, but at the same time, it gave me glimpses of good social workers. I had social workers around me throughout processes that I looked and I admired so much. I think I was born with compassion. I've definitely had friends, social work friends that try to analyze me and think, why do you like to help so much? It must be some need you have, or you want to fix everything. And it really isn't. As far back as I remember, as a young child, I would always be the one that would give everybody else the lollipops that weren't broken, and I would take the broken one. I just have a heart for wanting everybody else to have. Material things mean nothing to me. I'm not materialistic at all. So I like to see other people have stuff and be happy and well, and not in a way of, in a way that there's a mental health disorder, trust me there. But at the same time, I've always had compassion. So at the age of 14 and going through my adoption process, I became very clear that I was going to be a social worker. And I remember I actually graduated high school when I was 17 and knew I was coming to Florida State University and that I was going to get my social work degree. So I graduated at the beginning of June, my high school senior year, and I was at FSU by the end of June, starting my first semester of college, and sort of embarked out, because I'd always heard you want to gain experience in the field and kind of make sure that's what you want to do. And I went all around town trying to find places that would hire me. I needed jobs, I couldn't find any social work jobs, and finally I ended up at the doorstep of DCF after asking even other agencies, can I just volunteer for you? Can I do anything? I need experience. And nobody would really give me that chance. Well, DCF, even back then, was hungry for people who would work for them, and especially for free, because they didn't have the money. So they took me in, and it really wasn't intentional, but I ended up, they decided, since my life experience, that maybe I could mentor some kids that were in foster care. And so one of my first girls I worked with, she was 14 years old in a foster home, and the parental rights had been terminated, but she was very adamant that she did not want to be adopted. She did not want to be part of the forever family because she'd been hurt. Her mother looked her straight in the eye and said, I don't want you, and left her on the steps of the courthouse. And so she was very hurt and broken. And in working with her as a mentor, I swore to myself many times over at the benches at Lake Ella that I would never work with teenagers. Oh my gosh, she put me through the ringer. And so I was like, I would never work with teenagers ever again. But my experience at DCF in building relationships and gaining the trust of the people I sort of reported to, ended up finding myself going into foster homes, started relicensing foster homes. They would then send me out and actually license foster homes and do the training. They would send me into Florida Baptist or different agencies around town. I was licensing these big agencies. I was 19 years old at the time, 20 years old, and I'm sitting there at a corporate table and trying to check off a licensing list and thinking, how did they have trust in me to do this? But I think it was just desperation. But it definitely laid the foundation and the groundwork for me to start in child welfare. I always knew with my social work degree, as everybody spoke, you have sort of an inclination to work with a certain population, and I knew whatever I did, I wanted it to be with children and helping them gain sort of, even the less fortunate children, helping them gain a level ground so when they were able to make choices on their own, that they could be equal with those that had more than they did. So anyway, I really had put a lot of effort into my volunteering at Department of Children and Families. In the meantime, I was about to graduate, married my high school sweetheart, and started my MSW program. We were both students, and so as life changes with you, I certainly rolled with the punches, went in to get my master's in social work degree, and thought this will be great. I'm not, we were married for 3 years at the time when I was graduating, and I was like, this will be great. I really look forward to working. I've always wanted to be a mom, but I think I want to do that later. I really want to gain a foundation for my social work experience. And sure enough, as soon as I said those words, I became pregnant. And so I have 3 sons. All 3 of them were when I said this would be the worst time to get pregnant. 3 times I had children. So I grappled with what am I going to do? I'm at this point in my life where I always wanted to stay home with my children, but yet I just got my degree, and it was a true hardship for me to decide what to do. But again, I have the most flexible degree around, and so I made it work for me. I put my name out there and just kind of talked to people, networking. I know that's a big word you always hear, networking, and I'll further when I talk a little bit about wisdom, but found myself able to provide services for a private adoption attorney in town. And so I said, well, you know what, I can do anything if I can do it at nights and weekends. And so it worked out perfectly for me. I could be home with my children during the daytime, and when their dad was with them at night, I could do nights and weekend work. I also, for the Department of Children and Families, ran some of the MAP trainings, which is you're familiar with the parent trainings to become foster parents or adoptive parents, and was able to get home study experience where you write these long reports and move through homes for to be able to take in children. And so things were good. I still was working part-time, happily married. Something took us away. My husband's job at the time, his job took us away to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and showed up there. My kids were all starting school. They were up. My last one was like in pre-K 4, and so I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to like work in a place now. And so there was a small town of Hershey. There's actually the Milton Hershey School that is completely funded by Milton Hershey and his wife. A few years before, even they were married, before they passed away, they had heart for orphan boys, and so they opened up this school, and the entire trust fund of the Hersheys, they funded this school, and it's for very, very low income families. My job was to provide assessments, work on a multidisciplinary team, see what was going on in the home, and kind of document the social issues. Was it, maybe a child that was living with a grandparent who was actually diagnosed with cancer, and so therefore they had nowhere to go. And so thousands and thousands of children actually apply to this school every year because it's like winning the lottery. When you get to accepted at the Milton Hershey School, it's a beautiful campus that completely rivals an FSU campus. I kid you not quite as large, but big, beautiful buildings. They have family homes that have great couples that leave each home. There's structure. They get new clothes. They get braces if they need them. They get their full health care. They get their food. And they get bicycles and the activities that, extracurricular activities, they keep them busy. And a lot of these kids actually do go on, and once they graduate from high school from Milton Hershey, they have scholarships all over. I mean, to me, I loved it. My passion was there because it took kids who had nothing and they were down and out and had some really tough circumstances and sort of transformed their lives. They lived on campus. During the school year, they would go home just on holidays or summer breaks to be with their family, which was tough. It was a boarding school, but they had opportunities that they never would have had before. And so part-time work with that. And then as life would have it, I actually found myself in the middle of a divorce and going, okay, now I'm a single mom, and I have 3 children. I've only worked part-time up until this point, so now I've got to find a job that actually makes money, makes a little bit of money. And so I knew that with my kids being in school, that I wanted a school schedule. I've always been a very involved parent. I'm very close with my children. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to need to figure out something where I'm home and they're home. And this is the power of networking. I lived in an apartment with my 3 children, and at that point I was just asking everything, like, look, I need work. I need a job. I still have the adoption stuff going on, so that was kind of part-time as well. And so I literally was handing out my resume to whoever would, look me in the eye. And as it turned out, in the apartment complex, there was a neighbor of mine that was out, who was leaving at the same time. I said, hey, look, I know I'm a new neighbor. I'm going to introduce myself, and here's my resume. I'm really looking for some work. I'm a social worker. I can do, I've had a lot of different experience in these areas. And he said, well, you know who I am, don't you? And I said, no. And he goes, well, I'm actually the principal at an alternative school in town. And, I think, it's kind of a mess over there. We kind of just need someone to come in and fix it. We just, it's kind of overrun with gang members. There's a lot of negativity. It's just kind of a mess. And we kind of, all the teachers have gotten together, and we can't all figure out what to do. And so, we can get you on board. And so that's the power of networking. Even when you're a little questionable, like, this is a little strange, handing my resume out to strangers, but that actually got me the job at the Second Chance School here in town. And it basically works with mostly juvenile delinquents. It's 6th through 12th grade. Most of them have had criminal charges, and they've been expelled from their regular school, or their discipline or behavior issues or suspensions have led them to get kicked out of regular school, so they're at the Second Chance School. And so I learned really quickly how to do pat-down searches and check everybody's pockets and take their shoes off and do all that kind of stuff. And it was an eye-opening experience. I'll never forget my first day. Now, mind you, I've never had one day of teaching experience in my whole entire life. And so before, a couple of days before they were going to get me started, got my room all cutesy looking and all these reward charts, and this is your anger meter, and so if you get angry here, then, then you got to know if you get to this level, you've got to have an intervention, and, cutesy room, all colorful, and, the first day the guys start walking in, mostly males, in the school, and they come walking in the door, and they're all, wrapping their gangs with their handkerchiefs or their colored clothing or their Band-Aids on their shirt that represents their part of this side of town instead of that side of town. And I was like, okay. And I have my little stool up front because I didn't want to be like a regular teacher. I wanted to be cool. And so you have my stool, and I'm like, hop up on the stool, and I'm like, okay, now what? I'm looking at this crowd of, guys, and I'm like, and it was crazy. I'll never forget that first day. But that really was an experience because it was my first full-time job. But it really got my hands into social work as a teacher. And so at this point, mind you, I worked, for DCF. I've done adoptions with a private attorney. I had worked at a private boarding school as an admissions counselor, and then now here I am a teacher. And so I'm a social worker, but I've had all these different roles up to this point, and every single one, it just worked with my family. That's what I needed. And so I do want to encourage you, even before I finish, is just, don't lose sight of the value that you have and the strengths that you have, in the sense that, no matter where you are in life, there will be, there are opportunities. You just have to knock on the right doors. And so, worked at the school, and then finally a position came open as a school social worker. I did that for a year and a half. And then, a few months ago, IBM sought me out. They heard of my child welfare experience, and they were interested because they were working with the Department of Children and Families on a project to overhaul their software. Basically, caseworkers in the field, they have to document everything. Well, the problem right now is that they go out in the field, but the paperwork they need is back at the office. So they may go visit the kid for 5 minutes, but oh gosh, they forgot this because they have to go back to the office. So 80% of their time is spent going back and forth or getting the administrative paperwork or going to the courthouse to figure out what just happened with the trial or the hearing. And so anyway, we are working to make caseworkers more mobile by having mobile apps on their phone to help them become safer in the field because they're checking in and out, as well as being able to document the things that they need to document, have everything at their fingertips. And we live in an electronic age, and businesses are doing this already, so why can't social workers have those same benefits? And so make your social work degree work for you. There's so many opportunities out there, and if it's a job that you think I'm going to get into, and I'm going to, it may not be social work, then get into it with that mindset that, hey, I'm going to do my job, but it's after hours that you're thinking creatively and outside of the box, and how can I make this job work for me and to benefit the constituents that you really want to benefit. So I could go on forever about social work, but anyway, any questions, try them down, and I'll answer afterwards. So thank you.
Okay, and our last speaker is Upendo Shabazz-Phillips. She received her MSW in 1994 and her MSW in 1995.
And I'm going to talk on this side since everybody's talking on that. So change your, and I like to walk and talk as well. So let me just first start by saying I feel so privileged to come back to my alma mater and talk to you all about social work. I love being a social worker. And a lot of times, most people don't even know that I'm a social worker until I tell them I'm a social worker. I actually started in the clinical track. I wanted to be the best therapist possible. I just knew I was going to be that type of therapist. And in my little ivory tower, thinking who I wanted to be, therapizing out with. But what ended up happening is a reality about who I am as a person. And that's part of what I want to get back to you all tonight is make sure you know who you are as a person and what you desire to be in this field. So I started working, doing direct services, and I actually sucked at it. I really did. I really sucked at it. So much so I remember sitting across from my supervisor who was actually writing me up because I told a family they should kick their kid out of their house. She said, you can't do that. Why not? Well, through that process, I realized I really wasn't happy doing direct services. But as a way of doing service because I knew I wanted to serve. I knew I wanted to give back to my community. I knew I wanted to change the world. How can I do that? How can I make that happen? And so what ended up happening? The networking. Very important skill, networking. Through my travels, someone actually recognized I had a talent because I worked under a particular grant, and I would have to submit reports for the grant that I worked under. And so one of the main chief operating officers for the school district of Palm Beach County says, why don't you come work for me, Upendo? I realized that you can write really well. Me? Yes, you can write really well. Why don't you come and be our head grant writer for the school district? That's what I did for 6 years for the school district of Palm Beach County. I wrote grants, and not only did I write grants, whatever grants I was able to bring in, I oversaw those grants for the school district. As part of my networking, of being a great grant writer, because the one thing about social work, part of being a social worker, you really need to understand what the community is that you plan on serving. You need to be able to understand and empathize. What better writer than that can tell a story, right? Yes. So through my networking, and I decided I didn't want to write grants anymore, I want to do something else, because that's the one thing about social work. You can do any and everything with this degree. So through my networking, a job was posted for United Way of Palm Beach County. I think everybody in this room knows what United Way is, right? It's a fundraising organization, right? They decided they wanted to change their business. They wanted to be more impactful. And they were looking for people who had either a social worker degree, a sociology degree. I was like, I'm going to go for this job. And I actually ended up going for it. And what I learned through that process is I ended up being a great fundraiser. I did. I raised, when I left United Way of Palm Beach County, I was bringing $3 million in underneath my department. That's just talking to people. That's not the grants I brought in, because I had to write grants too. But that's just talking with people. I found out that I was able to convey to people the need in the community. So another thing I want to give to you all, learn how to speak in front of people. Learn how to do presentations. Learn how to actually have people feel what it is that you are trying to get accomplished. And that's what I did. I would make people cry at heck. So get in your pocket and give me some of that money, right? But I would make them truly, truly understand what the need is in the community. Who better to do that than a social worker, right? Who better to convince people, especially people who have money? It's really easy to make them feel guilty, you know that, right? That's what I did. To have them give us money so we can put that money back in the community. And as a result of that, I ended up being promoted to Vice President of Community Impact. And that's when I really, really got into my element of really understanding and seeing the community, networking with major influence makers in the community about how do we not only bring this money in, but how do we put this money back into the community? How do we support the nonprofit sector? How do we build the capacity of individuals that are working in these nonprofits? So I got really, really good at training people and creating programs. That's another thing I learned. How to create programs. I love that. That's another way for me to give back. Absolutely. So as a result of me networking, because I do like to network, and the one thing I can tell you about being a social worker, and you all know this, it's all about relationships. I burnt some bridges very early on in my career, but I did it when I was 20 versus now. So if you're going to do it now. Get it over with. Because it is true. You might have to cross that bridge back again or come back down that ladder. But do it now. I can't do it now. I just can't do it now. But really, part of it also is really understanding who you are. So fast forward, vice president for many, many years. And I live in Palm Beach County. Like I said, I can raise money like no problem. Like today, I was at a meeting today with the Florida Nonprofit Alliance, raising money for them at a big meeting. Just trying to really understand what the sector is like for nonprofits. And as a result of me networking, a job became available at a local foundation. So I work for Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, and we are a funder throughout the state of Florida. And I never thought that I would ever work for an organization that, number one, I don't have to raise money, because we're endowed. Does everybody know what endowed means? The money is in perpetuity. And so I actually get to give out money now. And people think it's easy to give out money. It's not. Because the need is so great, and I have to say no. And it's really hard to say no to an amazing program, but I have to. But part of my job too is, if I can't give them money, what else can I do to support them? How can I help build the sector up? And that's my main strategy right now, my job, is how do I create capacity for nonprofits in the region that I am in? And I cover 3 counties in the state of Florida: Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie County. And I have such a privilege of truly, truly getting to know the nonprofits, getting to know the workers in the nonprofits. And all of them are social workers, most of them. And some of them, I have to be really honest, this is probably not a bill for you. Because of how they're interacting with their clients, how they're interacting with me, how they're interacting just overall. You can see it in their spirit that this is not the right field. And I think if I give anything to you, again, know who you are. The field of social work is so broad, you can do whatever you want with this degree. You really can. You can make your path very easily. But you must network, find your mentor. Can I tell you how many mentors I have? Like 15, even to this day. I do. Find your mentor. Even if they tell you no, don't ask them to be. Just start hanging out. Just call them up, hey, how are you doing? And always gravitate to people that's different from you. That's another thing I learned. You know, I have the most amazing job that I get to work with marginalized communities, Guatemalans, Haitians. I get to work with people with disabilities. That's amazing for me to see what can I do to create a better space for nonprofits that's serving those communities. Amazing. And I also teach at Barry University, Master Level Social Work students, but it's clinical at Barry. So my main goal, the only reason I agreed to teach at Barry University, only reason, is to convince one student to change from clinical to administrative. And it has worked out really, really well the last couple of years. I was 1 or 2 students say, Upendo Shabazz, oh my God, thank you. I was dying. I was dying. I was dying. Because you can do so much with this degree, you really, really can. Find your talent. I found out I was great at writing. Became a grant writer. I did a great living at grant writing. I really did. Just because we're social workers doesn't mean that we have to be broke. Have any one of you ever read Dan Pallotta's Uncharitable? Please read that book. It's called Uncharitable. We are providing great service to communities in the work that we do. And I totally agree with you. We are paid so low. But when you think about it, we should be paid 3 times as much as what we make. My very first job in direct services, they offered me $18,000 for a master's level as a master level therapist. Guess what I said? Yes!